Welcome to Gun Talk. My name is Dave, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to remove the trigger assembly from a SIG P320 fire control unit. There are two reasons I can think of that you would want to do this. The first reason being you've got a new aftermarket trigger and you want to swap this out. The second reason would be that you've got a dirty fire control unit. You want to do a deeper clean, and this would be the first step in the disassembly process. So one of the things, I've seen a lot of content out there on how to do this, and I've seen people using various tools to do it. And I think those are probably less than optimal ways of doing it. This spring, this is the trigger spring right here. And we want to make sure that we don't violate the integrity of that spring. So I think when you start using pliers and other tools to start pulling on this spring, then you're kind of setting yourself up for potential compromise of that spring, which would compromise the trigger pull. So we want to get this spring off without putting any undue stress here on the spring. So there's one YouTube channel out there called SIG Guy, and he shows a technique for removing this spring, and best I can tell from replicating that process is it does not compromise the spring at all. This isn't anything I came up with. I'm merely replicating what he did in his video, and I'm doing this just to get more content out on YouTube to show a safe and effective way to perform this technique. So to begin, let's look at our components. So obviously this is our trigger. This is part of the trigger too. This is our trigger bar right here. And this trigger bar extends back here, this area right here. This black piece is part of our sear housing. So the trigger bar sits up into the housing and behind this sear housing protruding out here. So what we're going to do is we can move the trigger bar down. It'll move down about 1/8 of an inch. So we'll pull it down. And when I pull it down, that's getting it out of the sear housing that it's recessed up into. So we'll pull it down, and then we have to get this part of the trigger bar on the back side of the sear housing. So I'm going to pull down, and then I'm going to pull slightly away, pull the trigger bar slightly away from the frame so I can wrap this part of the trigger bar around to this side of the sear housing. So it's not hard to do, but it does take a little bit of practice, because when you start pulling on this trigger bar, at first it feels like you're probably doing something you shouldn't be doing. But trust the process. It does work, and it just takes a little practice, a few times to do this, and you'll catch on to what it feels like and how it clicks in and out of place. All right, so I'm going to pull down to get my trigger bar out of the sear housing. Then I'm going to lift up and around to the back side of the sear housing like that. So at this point, everything just falls apart. The trigger comes off. I can move the trigger bar. I can try to remove the trigger bar. There we go. All right, that was a little ugly, but I got it off. Okay, to reinstall the trigger bar assembly, we'll simply reverse the process. So let's take the spring in our trigger bar. It will go in like this. Hold that in place, and then the hook side will come in the back side of the trigger bar frame, connect like that, and then we'll want our trigger bar to sit on the back of the sear housing like that. Okay. The trigger bar up here is sitting flush on the frame. We've got a hole right here. And if we look at our trigger, we've got a little knob, and that little knob's going to sit down in that hole. It's going to capture the trigger bar. This part of the trigger will go into this hole, and it'll slightly come out the back side of the frame. So let's push that in. Let's line up the knob with the trigger bar. You just kind of wiggle it around, and you'll kind of hear it click and catch. So I'm flush here. If you look on the back side, I've come through the other side of the frame. So I'm going to want to kind of hold that in place. And then now we're going to pull the trigger bar back onto the other side of the sear housing like that. So that's all there was to it. So I'm captured here. We want to make sure that's captured. We want to make sure we've pushed up into the sear housing, and we can kind of function check that. If we start pulling the trigger, we can see our movement, and we can see we're capturing the internals into the sear housing. So that's a nice clean install of the trigger bar there. So that is all there is to it. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to my channel. Thanks, and have a great day.